this question, you can vote for it, and then we can ask the most voted questions. So it's very useful in that sense. Please turn your camera off and your audio off in Zoom. It should be done by default, so that we don't interfere with the speakers. And we now move to a 10-minute individual presentation of each panelist. 10 minutes, 8 to 12 minutes is okay. And after, we will reflect together on further steps and standardization efforts that we need in the law enforcement sector. I leave now the floor to Patrick Rother from the NIST. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to do this. It's a workshop, and it's nice to attend a session where we do work rather than just talk with a symposium or conference format. So yeah, my name is Patrick Rother. I am at a government lab outside Washington, DC, that specializes in measurement. And so if we could go to the next slide. Yeah, my background, I'm a physicist, but with recent relevant experience in pattern recognition, neural networks, biometrics standards, some hardware also. So NIST is a measurement lab. We do not do policy and we do not do regulation. Those come from other agencies in the United States and from the White House, essentially. So the Office of Management and Budget is an organization that gives us policy when that is needed in a technical area. So the relevant work that I do is that I lead the world's largest evaluations, independent public evaluations of face recognition algorithms. This is the face recognition vendor test. And that is notable because we publish openly pretty much everything that we do. And that includes the performance values for face recognition against, alongside the developer names. So for a developer, there is some reputational risk in participating in the benchmarks that we run. We use nowadays something like 150 million photographs that are shared with us from US government agencies under their operational authorities. And they come with metadata, and that allows us to look at things like demographic dependencies and the umbrella topic of image quality dependencies. So how does an algorithm behave with people who aren't looking at the camera, for example? What do we do with this data? We publish it. It's used by a number of communities worldwide, but we give quantitative support for biometrics and law enforcement standards, both domestically in the United States and internationally at ISO. And we also support US government agencies, essentially in a consultancy role, giving them advice on how they might do things differently. Next slide, please. So the challenges, and these are discussed quite openly recently in the press, are to do with trustworthiness and when face recognition doesn't do what you would expect it to do. And germane to this topic of law enforcement and some other applications is that false positive rates from a particular algorithm can vary greatly, and 3 orders of magnitude across different demographic groups. So these false match rates would be higher in women and the old and the young, that is typical, but also in ethnicities that are, everybody believes, underrepresented in training data. And that means higher false positive rates in Africa, East Asia for Western algorithms, and notably for some Chinese algorithms, they do the opposite. They give you higher false match rates in Eastern Europe faces rather than East Asian faces. And this effect, this false positive rate variation across demographic groups, occurs even with passport quality photos. It is not related to image quality. So it's related to the natural appearance of the person. False negative rates very much less. So I've shaded this lower, and this distinction between false positive rates and false negative rates is very important because different applications depend are very sensitive to whether false negative rates drive most of the errors or false positive rates. False negatives are when people don't authenticate as themselves or aren't found as themselves. And this is mostly related in large part to bad photography. And so it's not really the algorithm per se that is driving a false negative rate higher. It's related to data, bias in data, inclusiveness in AI, trustworthy AI is the topic of this panel. So what are the solutions to this? We have published metrics, and we've published tables of bias values for false negatives and false positives. And we've contributed to a standard now under development on measurement of demographic effects in biometric systems. And that doesn't just include algorithms, but it could include cameras and full systems. Developers must address false positives. It really does seem to be an algorithm effect. Whereas deployers must address false negatives because it's in large part a photographic effect. Image quality drives this. The recommendation is to test and test and test again, so we have some visibility into what's going on with a face recognition system. Next slide, please. Okay, so the way forward, what's missing? We don't have certification of algorithms, and that is not something that we do. We have not historically drawn lines on our performance results to say pass or fail. And the reason for that is you want to certify for a particular purpose, and we try to do things generically so far. Also missing is operational testing. So there's pre-deployment and post-deployment testing. Operational testing is that discipline. There is an ISO standard for that. It hasn't been revised now for maybe 15 years. And it would be useful to look at that standard and revise it with a view to AI and trustworthiness. We also don't have image quality measurement tools, and that is also a topic for standards development. Again, it's not by any means complete. Also algorithm development, as I said, by the developers, improved standards for the use of FR in law enforcement. So there are a number of areas where face recognition is used in slightly different ways by law enforcement. And so some standards are needed there to sort of regulate what you can do with images and how you should report. Short term, also humans play a part in investigations in law enforcement, and it is probably to the benefit of everyone if the human role is reduced, because humans also can make errors, and that's a large topic of conversation there. So I'll sort of conclude my remarks here by saying, by quoting an ISO document from JTC1, that this really is about trustworthiness, and their definition there is ability to meet stakeholders' expectations in a verifiable way. So that last phrase there implies testing and quantitative expression of what's going on with an AI-enabled biometric system, face recognition system. So yeah, I will conclude there, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick, for this excellent, simple but super relevant talk. Yes, we all the people working in this field of biometrics in general, but face recognition in particular, are trying to gain the wide public trustworthiness, our end users trustworthiness, and certification can be a way to gain this trustworthiness, but I have to say it. I'm Patrick's #1 fan. When you are a student and you work on face recognition, you read Patrick Brothers' papers. When you work in a face recognition company, you go to the NIST, to the benchmark that Patrick is organizing. And Javier, our next speaker, can say a lot about it. So I think that the NIST and Patrick particularly, as the leader of all these initiatives, are doing a great job to improve FR trustworthiness, trustworthiness in face recognition. So I leave the floor now to Javier Rodriguez Saeta. He's the CEO of HERTA, an SME specialized on face recognition, and also with a large 10 years expertise working with law enforcement agencies in Spain and worldwide. So please, Javier, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present in this very relevant scenario. My name is Javier Rodriguez. I'm the CEO of HERTA, and HERTA is a software company that develops artificial intelligence tools with focus in facial recognition. At HERTA, we deploy projects worldwide and work with some governments and law enforcement agencies, of course, in facial recognition and help them to improve their tools. My personal experience includes 22 years in the field of biometrics, working with fingerprints, with iris, with speaker recognition, but on top of that, with facial recognition. With HERTA, we have developed many different applications in a wide variety of sectors, from safe cities to border control, forensics, or live surveillance. Some examples: we have been recently awarded with the largest retail project in facial recognition in Mexico, with 1,600 stores connected and exchanging information among them. Or we have implemented the border control between Venezuela and Colombia. And just coming from today, we have been awarded with a very large project in India for the railway, which gives us more than 2,000 or 3,000 licenses with facial recognition. So really interesting and worldwide projects. Additionally, we were also in the marketing sector and providing information about demographics, statistics of visitors, and these type of things. Next slide, please. Yeah. So with regard to data, its balance and bias, it's trustworthy. We have faced many challenges, of course. First, how to obtain good quality data. Where? From the internet, from existing databases. Is this data of good quality? How can we be sure that this data has been labeled, for instance, without any mistake? Second, how to check data is well balanced. If it is not, then the application will be biased. So this has to be carefully supervised. Third, how to validate the source of origin. In this case, let's put an example. A university launches a new database. They claim it's perfectly balanced and includes all the use cases or samples you may need. Which are the criteria to validate that statement? And finally, how to exchange information. We have a profile of an individual or a picture. How can we share that with third-party applications? Is this exchange made with a quality loss because of the format? As you can see, we have many questions. If we go to some potential solutions, and for these challenges, we can recommend, for instance, to do validation tests, of course. You get a new database and you launch your own test, your protocol, let's say. Also, it's interesting to label by yourself, to dedicate resources to check images or videos and ensure that the content is correct. But of course, this implies normally a high cost and a huge effort. It is also important to obtain data from trustworthy organizations, because this increases the possibility of receiving good quality data, of course. And finally, to mitigate the problem of exchanging information, you can use existing standards. Perhaps the most spread one among law enforcement agencies is NIS format for images, of course. Another standard from aviation is ICAO, but pictures are of extremely good quality, which is sometimes not the case. Next slide, please. Talking about the future and our wish list, let's say, we see many companies offering data to train AI models. There is an important business there, of course, and the approach normally is your competitor is using this database and they provide you with a sample. But how trustable is this? They don't normally offer information. If they do it, you need to validate that by yourself. So from my point of view, this is something that should be regulated in some way to help companies to select the right providers. In this sense, standards will help to facilitate data quality, to validate data quality, and help to take decisions about what to buy and who to buy. But at the same time, they should be flexible, of course. Data is normally scarce, so hard restrictions will seriously affect the industry. From SME point of view, methodology and costs are critical. So standards should check especially the results. If I train a model, it is well balanced, let's make a standard test. If it gives you more than, let's say, a specific threshold, let's say 90%, then it's well balanced. If standards try to fix the data necessary to train, or the amount of data, this could be a mistake from my point of view. And I will put you an example which is perhaps not politically correct, but will help you to understand very well the problem. Let's think about ethnicity, and we are training a model. We can say, okay, let's select 3 main ethnicities, and we can populate our database with 1/3 of Asian faces, 1/3 of black faces, and 1/3 of white faces. What happens then if we deploy the system in Mexico, or if we deploy the system in India? Will it work? So, as you can see there, it's very difficult to include all the cases, all the relevant cases that could affect your application. Sometimes it's a question of designing this model depending on the location, but of course there are many different approaches. To conclude this presentation, I wanted to highlight the importance of the TCO, the total cost of ownership. This, in my opinion, should be low, because if the standards will be adopted mostly by SMEs. If this cost is high, then it will create a barrier, and only big companies could adopt this type of standards. So that's very relevant for our sector. And that's all from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Javier, for this important view from the side of SMEs and the problems SMEs are facing. Data is the new gold. And the more data you have and the more quality it has, your algorithm will be the best. That's for sure. However, it is extremely expensive and time-consuming to collect all this data. We had actually in the workshop yesterday, we had a whole session devoted to data, and this was the main conclusion. And we also concluded, as you pointed out, that data is very expensive for SMEs, and because you have to rely on these third-party companies that provide data, and are they trustworthy? Can you Can we trust them? Which are the sources they use? And this should be regulated. For sure. Also, we commented in this session about the need for documenting datasets. Documentation is a key towards transparency, so it's very important that it is regulated. So thank you, Javier, for providing this view on SMEs. We have a timely question in the chat. I say it is timely because Patrick and Javier have spoken, and it is about face recognition, so they are both experts on this matter. So Akis asks, is there a public benchmark dataset that the face recognition algorithm developer can use to assess the performance of the system before entering the NIST face recognition vendor test? So basically, is there an open benchmark we can use, Patrick, before going to the real FRVT?
There are many benchmark data sets available going back that have been developed over a 20 or 30-year period. Any algorithm developer will use them typically because contemporary academic publications need results for those databases. So there's the IJBC database that we distribute. Previously, there was the Labeled Faces in the Wild database. The databases that we use are sequestered, so we cannot issue a partition of those publicly. There's a very large array of databases for different purposes for face recognition. Yeah.
Javier, perhaps you have some experience with these databases. I know I was working at HERTA some years ago, so I was in charge of also of training algorithms and so on. And yeah, we were for sure using the IJBC. But perhaps you can complement.
Of course, you can answer Isabel by yourself, even. But there are, as Patrick mentions, there are some databases that are used worldwide for vendors, from vendors to show the performance and compare against different systems. One is Labeled Faces in the Wild. When you go to NIST, of course, you can do some pre-tests and everything. I mean, there are many databases that can be used for that purpose, to compare among systems. But of course, if in the future we have a standard, maybe it's interesting to create some type of official benchmarks, because there is nothing official currently. I mean, these databases are named at almost every paper a scientific paper you find from facial recognition. But it would be great to create something like official, as the NIST is doing, and maybe from that to establish this type of comparisons. It's exactly currently what Patrick is doing. So in this sense, I would say that of course we can find today many of these tests in the internet, and these databases are available for everyone who wants to test their system.
Thank you, Javier. We have related questions in the chat. Two of them that are complement each other. They basically ask if these available data sets are sufficiently diverse in terms of demographics, so that AI bias can be properly assessed.
Well, Patrick, do you want to answer?
Yeah, just a few comments. It depends. So if you want a complete worldwide representation of data, this is very difficult to obtain. If you are going to operate in a certain demographic, then you can find data that is representative for certain demographic groups. So if you're operating in a school in Iceland, then your demographic would be very different than a school in Senegal. And that would be very different than a border control agency in New York City. Universal data with full balance and full representation is simply not available.
Yeah, I basically agree with Patrick. And as I told you during my presentation, sometimes the best thing you can do when creating your artificial intelligence model is to think about the application and where this will be deployed. It's almost impossible to create a universal system. It's impossible to find a system perfectly balanced to test your application. So it depends on your application, your scenario, the age group you are addressing, or the location in the world. You will find probably some specific databases to try your system.
Yes, common sense in the end, no? Has to be applied. Okay, thank you, Patrick, Javier. Now we move to Robin Allen, which is our lawyer and specialist on discrimination, law related to discrimination. So Robin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can I just confirm you can see me and hear me?
We can.
Yeah, if the internet is poor, I will turn the video off, but hopefully this will work.
It works perfectly, Robin.
Good. Can you please give me the first slide? Thank you. Just a little bit about myself. I have been working in the field of non-discrimination and equality law now since the mid-1970s, so a very long time. I was involved with the European Commission in the drafting of the equality directives in 2000 and have taken cases to the European Court and on all the known protected characteristics under European law. I've also, separately from that, been a criminal judge on a part-time basis. My main specialism is equality law, but I have for 20 years been a part-time judge doing criminal cases 2 or 3 weeks a year. So I'm very familiar with the criminal practice and procedure as well. I have a specialism in the interface between equality law and the developing use of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. And with my colleague Dee Masters, who is speaking in the session on employment, we set up the AILawHub.com, which please visit. It's just at the moment essentially a selection of our blogs, but also includes the public-facing work that we've published as well. Our work over the last 5 years has included assisting the UN Special Rapporteur on his very recent report on AI and discrimination as it affects persons with disabilities, co-authoring Technology Managing People, the legal implications for the Trade Union Congress in the UK, which is the main union representative, but looking at new ways of work and the way AI operates there. We did a major report for Equinet, the European Network of Equality Bodies, which was reprised in the white paper in advance of the AI Act, on how equality bodies, not just within member states, but across the Council of Europe as well, all equality bodies in Europe, how they should engage with these issues. We've developed training for regulators on behalf of the Council of Europe, and we've advised business and governments and individuals on AI. We've just completed a task of advising the UK government on how the GDPR should be amended post-Brexit in the UK in order to have a better connection, in fact, with European equality law. So that's something of our background. Next slide, please. Now, my task is to speak as the lawyer and also to look at the issues of how AI systems are being used in the law enforcement context. And before I go into the first bullet point, I think it may be helpful for this workshop just to look at the range of use cases or domains in which AI is being used in law enforcement. So if we just take policing for a moment, AI systems are, and this is beyond just facial recognition, which we've been talking a certain amount about this morning, very important, and I'll pick up on that. But AI systems are being used in decisions about allocation of police resources in a very large way across Europe, where limited police resources should be targeted. It's very important we think about that. Existing biases in information about criminality, recidivism, and so on are causing reinforced policing in certain areas and less policing in other areas. AI systems are being used about decisions about liberty in bail applications when people are being arrested, causing predictions about whether further criminality will take place or whether police should restore liberty to people pending trial. Then if we get into the system of court trials in the criminal sphere, decisions about evidence in trials, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment, decisions about the quality of evidence, and then post-trial, AI systems are being used to predict what is an appropriate sentence. A rather low-grade AI system was used throughout my career, or about 50% of my career as a judge, in order to advise me on what length of sentence or what kind of sentence would be most appropriate for a criminal who had been convicted. So that's in the straightforward criminal sphere. But then if we move a little bit into other areas of law enforcement, use cases include gatekeeping, such as immigration control or access to social advantages, often through biometric identification, and connected issues around financial assessments and so on. And then other kinds of use cases where AI systems are being used include administrative law enforcement, as in, for instance, simple tax defaults and parking fines and controls of a lower level that we wouldn't normally call criminality. Of course, AI systems can also be used at a much higher level in relation to financial fraud, but that would normally fall into the earlier class of case that I was talking about. Now, in this area, I wanted to note, first of all, that there are some parallels with technological development in relation to the use of DNA in the criminal system. When DNA was introduced, it was seen as providing great certainty in the law enforcement process. And there's been successful standardization in relation to the way in which DNA evidence is found, assessed, and deployed. Some of the people in the workshop will be familiar with ISO 1720, 1725, 15189, which are now the standards that are normally used in relation to the preparation of DNA evidence. Certainly they are effectively required standards within the UK. But we don't have anything like that in the use cases that I've just been speaking about. Take, for instance, analysis of voice evidence. So voice recognition evidence is now being deployed in courts. How do you assess it? First of all, how does the judge decide whether it is acceptable evidence to be used at all? And then if we go into the first bullet point, you can see how is that to be presented to juries and decision makers in the law enforcement context. So standards have got to be developed in order to enable people to understand, first of all, whether the evidence is presentable, but also to determine whether it is understandable by those who've got to assess its relevance in due course. Throughout all of this is the question of discrimination. We talked a lot about bias yesterday and not so much about discrimination, although my colleague from the Fundamental Rights Agency did bring this back into it. But laws against discrimination are basic and fundamental, and it's the deployment of evidence that may have bias that can lead to discriminatory outcomes. So in fixing standards, we have to think beyond bias, but also to deployment. And I was really heartened by, first of all, Patrick's clear reservations in the use of the information about the AI outputs that we have, and also Javier's emphasis about how we need to set the context within which these AI outputs can be used. Obviously, human rights issues will be a significant part of this. So can we just do the last slide now, please? Thank you. Controlled innovation. All law enforcement agencies have to have a separate oversight committees. This is happening a bit, but it hasn't happened enough. And in standard setting, it's necessary to engage with oversight committees to see how they use and can control these kinds of systems. And through this, we also need to remember that fundamental human rights law requires equality of arms, which means that accused persons have to have full access to AI ADM systems used by law enforcement agencies to be able to challenge their use and accuracy. So the standard of comprehensibility that goes beyond decision makers, but also to accused persons to understand and be able to challenge. And finally, a small but very important point. All the data sets that I've ever seen are deficient in relation to disabled people. Disabilities are so heterogeneous that it's really, really difficult to incorporate them properly within data sets. And therefore, I think there's a special question about law enforcement where disability issues may be missed or picked up wrongly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robin. Personally, and I think it's most of the audience will agree, I learned a lot from you, because it's true that we think about law enforcement and we go immediately to face recognition, but there are many, many other applications that are equally or even more important that are used in courts, and they are not so known by the wide public. So thank you for raising this. And perhaps Rosalia can complement, because she also has the view of a law enforcement agency. So please, Rosalia, you have the floor. I don't know if you want to share slides finally, or you prefer to speak. I'm not sure if we lost Rosalia. Giovanni, can you check if Rosalia is
Yes,
connected?
no, I don't. I'm checking. I don't see her among the participants for the moment.
Okay. Well, perhaps we can go through a couple of questions we have in in the chat to see
Okay,
if
she's back.
Rosalia.
She's back. She's back.
She's back. Okay, okay.
She just joined. She asked me for approving her. So let's see.
Perfect.
She should be there. Hello, Rosalia.
Hi, Rosalia.
No.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the technical problems. I am National Police Quota, and it's so complicated to me to attend in the meeting. So please, sorry for the delay.
No, you don't have to apologize. We thank you because we know it's very complicated for you to be here today. So big thanks, Rosalia.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I think it's possible. I try to explain in connection with the last presentation the needs and the work that law enforcement agencies like Spanish Ministry of Interior is doing in the field of standardization and of the implementation of artificial intelligence procedures of artificial intelligence in their information and communication systems. Okay, I try to share my screen, but it's complicated. Okay,
I put you co-host. I think you should be able to.
Yeah. So
okay. Yes, we see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. I introduce myself very briefly. I'm a captain from Guardia Civil, Rosalia Machín Prieto, and currently I am in charge of at ministry level artificial intelligence and ICT projects to give support to law enforcement agency, like in Spain, National Police, Guardia Civil. So why do we regulate artificial intelligence use cases? For us, it's so important to define and integrate artificial intelligence procedures in our systems because we know that it has complexity, has opacity, are new systems unpredictable. We count on the need of autonomy and, of course, the problem, the quality and the standardization of the data. Of course, if we have to implement artificial intelligence procedures with, of course, industry and academy at national level, we have to take in account safety risk, of course, fundamental right, enforcement, legal uncertainty, because we are working in different expert groups at European level, and the regulation and the legal framework of artificial intelligence at European level is a slow part of this area. Of course, mistrust and fragmentations. Sorry, I put directly complete screen. Okay, and I suppose you know that European Commission, of course, has been working during the last 2 years, more or less, in the new framework, new regulatory framework based on reglement for artificial intelligence and the implementation of artificial intelligence. And if we establish an approach to this regulation for law enforcement agencies, we take in account different situations to define our use cases. The Commission established in the regulation established an acceptable risks prohibits use cases. High risk, for example, permit subject to compliance with artificial intelligence requirements and ex-ante conformity assessment. Artificial intelligence with specific transparency obligations, or minimal or no risk for the implementations in the security field. Okay, for us, it's so important, the regulatory framework, because it's the base on the technical development. And if we are so interested in this point, is because to establish certain standalone artificial intelligence systems in the following fields, we take in account the high risks in the regulatory framework. For law enforcement sciences, the artificial intelligence standards are needed not only for fight crimes and terrorism, organized crime and terrorism, or for example, in the last cases for digital evidences. Of course, are problems that we solve with the different ministry levels, but we need to work in our operative operations the biometric identifications and categorization of natural persons. We need the management and operation of critical infrastructure, because the protection of critical infrastructure is leading by law enforcement science. Education and vocational training. At the end, we need to teach our operative units to work with these new systems. We need, of course, work together with industry and academy and of all the actors at national and European level. We need employment and works management, access to self-employment, subcontracting. We need access to essential private services and public services, and of course their benefits. We work directly with European agencies like EULISA or Europol to work together to establish the new standards, not only in the data, but also in the communications. Of course, law enforcement is a so important field. Migration, asylum, and border control management is other field in which we need adapt new procedures of artificial intelligence. And of course, our collaboration with other ministries, like for example, justice ministries or exterior ministries, or all the actors involved in security at national level. So for us, for Spanish Ministry of Interior, and in general for law enforcement sciences, in the field of artificial intelligence systems intend to be used by law enforcement authorities. Why? Because we need establish and making individual risk assessments of natural persons in order to assess the risk of natural persons for offending and reoffending, of the risk for potential victims of criminal offenses. Predicting, of course, is other strategical line. Predicting the occurrence and reoccurrence of an actual or potential criminal offense, but based on the profiling of natural persons or assessing personality traits and characteristics or past criminal behavior or natural person or groups. If we establish and we develop and we establish a new interoperability environment at European level in which to protect the borders, we need to share information, biometric and identity information. Of course, we need to take in account the historical data and the new data for the new systems. Profiling of natural persons in the course of detection, investigation or prosecutions in criminal offenses. Crime analytics regarding natural person, allowing the law enforcement authorities. Polygraphs and similar tools or tools to detect emotional state of a natural persons. Detect deepfakes and evaluation of the reliability, the trust of the evidence in the course of investigation and prosecution of criminal offenses. In general, all these high-level risks are essential for law enforcement sciences to implement in the different information and telecommunication system for security. So for us, the impact to establish new procedures of artificial intelligence is so strong. It's a strong transformative impact in security field. Why? Because at the end, represent a meeting point with national and European lines of actions. We collaborate together to optimize and enhance the performance of the law enforcement agencies and other agencies, depending on the ministries of Interior. The strategy of European Union and the Security Union established our new rules and the new targets for the Agenda 2030. The developments in security and the new operations in the field of security established not only in small parts. We establish new use cases and validate new use cases with directly the needs of the operational units. Units which work in fighting crimes and terrorism, protections of external borders, protection of critical infrastructure, cybersecurity. At the end, all the fields to preserve the national security. And this is the reason why at ministry level, we develop and we consolidate a Center for Security, for Interior Security, directly in the Ministry of Interior as an innovation lab. In this innovation lab is where we validate and testing the new solutions and collaborate with industry and academy at national and European level. We try to adapt the new proceed of artificial intelligence, not only at national level, but also at European level. At national level, we try to promote the national strategy in artificial intelligence to promote the use of artificial intelligence in public administrations and in national strategies missions. Of course, aligned with European missions. And try to strengthen the national strategy to develop data platforms and technological infrastructure to support artificial intelligence. But on the other hand, we try to pre-finance the developments in artificial intelligence through the European programs, like Digital Europe program, police security funds, for example, general actions, union actions in general for data, for artificial intelligence, the new proposals for the next 3 years. We use, of course, innovation. For us, investigation, innovation and development is an important field in which we are working currently with all the industry and academy at European level too, in projects like the Starlight or Lago or Tenacity. And for us, the European strategy for data is an unlock the value of the data at the end, because the base is the regulatory framework, data sharing between companies and governments. And we need to establish the architecture to establish this sharing. With this share, it's so complicated for us work and for you too. Data spaces based on a common European structure to combat opacity, bias, and contribute to develop the artificial intelligence with the standards at European level. Prioritize, of course, for this strategic value. And data sets, boosting the European data economy, facilitate operational cooperation, reduce dependence on third countries, and promote innovation at European space. Of course, Spain, like all member states working the standardization on a new infrastructure for sharing this data. At the end, and in conclusion, I think that I use more time. We improve, and we try to improve overrun tech of our member states. We try to work in artificial intelligence in the area of digital to fight against terrorism, to the national security at the end. But not only, like we explained. We need to centralize services to reuse the data. It's so important for member state at European Commission to centralize this service. For what? To reduce dependence on third countries. At the end, the autonomy in data and the autonomy in pursuits on artificial intelligence are so important for member states and of course for European Commission. Reduce malicious threats, and the last but not the least, quality standards, the secret. And I think this is the title, one of the most strategic lines for us, the secret to acquire and to establish these improvements is the quality standards. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. I hope these 10 minutes were interest for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalia. Indeed, very interesting to have the first-hand information about a Spanish law enforcement agency. I know Rosalia for some years now, and I can say that she can answer any question related to law enforcement and AI. She has been involved in so many projects and so many ongoing laboratories and regulations. So thank you, Rosalia, for this overview and for especially putting the focus on use cases and those that are high risk. The fact that, for instance, in Spain, the law enforcement agencies are in charge of critical infrastructures is very important, and the importance of taking into account operational settings, in your case, to preserve national security, but this was also raised by the other speakers. So thank you, Rosalia. We can now move to, we can perhaps take one question in the chat, even though we are a bit short, we don't have much time left, but there is one popular question in the chat, and it is about deepfakes. So Akis is asking, are developments in deepfake technologies, that is AI synthetic content generation in general, affecting the benchmarking efforts in face recognition system? I think that it's a question to all speakers. How do you see deepfake technologies affect the law enforcement sectors?
Yes, of course. For example, in Spain, at ministry level, the intelligence centers to fight against crime and terrorism is the organism competent to detect defects to preserve the national security. And in these cases, for example, to introduce and to use procedures based on artificial intelligence are so complicated because for us is in many cases not dirigida, I don't know how to explain, not directly artificial intelligence procedures. So it's a high risk level for European Commission to use this kind of proxies in deepfakes. At the end, how can validate in a secure way if a fake is a fake or not? how can we train the systems at the end? We need that an agent or a person validate the system. So for us, it's a risk. It's a high risk, and the regulation at European level is high risk. This is the reason why we look for new solutions to detect this type of crime.
Perhaps Javier Rodriguez, you can complement, because Herta has some spoofing detectors, no? Some face spoofing detectors for identifying this kind of attacks.
Yes, and with regard to that, we are participating now in a new project about European project about deepfakes. We have just been recently awarded, so it's a hot topic, and I'm also as a reviewer also in a project about also deepfakes with main companies within Europe, and it's really an very interesting topic. How this affects benchmarking tests or performance and this type of things, that's very difficult to evaluate at this moment. We can say that at least most well-known databases are not contaminated, let's say, by deepfakes. But of course, in real scenarios is an issue, and at the European border controls, many cases have been detected, and that's a serious threat for security. So it's something to really take into account, and many of the efforts within the European Union go through this way.
Can I contribute?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm very, very well aware of the problem of deepfakes. There was a very interesting paper published by University College London, which has a centre called the Dawes Centre for Future Crime, which ranked deepfakes as the #1 problem connected with the criminal, the #1 problem of artificial intelligence being misused in a criminal context. Just a couple of years ago. There's a very useful paper. I'll put it in the chat, the reference to it. We're seeing increasingly issues related to deepfakes, but often at quite a low level, with people being impersonated to have access to bank accounts, and impersonation for property transactions. A classic one, for instance, is when a property transaction is taking place, there's a very large amount of money goes from A to B. We've had stories of deepfakes where people have impersonated the vendor of a property, stealing the money at the point of purchase. There are many other examples like that, which I'm sure Javier will be even more familiar with than I am. But it's a huge problem. And I think one of the issues that CENELEC could be looking at is standardization for personal identification online. A really important issue about how you are self-accredited online to be the person that you say you are. I mean, we're all familiar with two-factor identification, but this is really only scratching the surface. There's such a long way to go beyond that. I can see Rosalie nodding her head in agreement with that, but I'll stop there, and I'll put the reference in the chat for you to pick up.
Yeah, thank you. It will be very useful to have this reference. Unfortunately, we only have 6 minutes remaining, and I would like to do a last exercise. Giovanni, if you can share the mural, we can do the mapping in the mural to the second part of the mural. So while you were speaking, I was kind of multitasking. I was taking care of the questions in Slido, and also I was trying to compile the let's say the key points, no, the key messages of your talks. So here there are. They are supposed to compile the needs you have identified from the standardization perspective in different dimensions of standardization, measurement, whether we need metrics, whether we need agreements on terminology, on performance characterization, on compatibility interfaces, and finally on conformity assessment. So mostly regarding terminology, we did not complain too much about terminology. However, we identified the need for measuring bias in the metrics section for operational testing methods and to be standardized, as well as image quality measurement tools for standard image quality metrics. Also we need then in the compatibility interface, interoperationalization and interoperability. We need standards on interoperability, which are more in the phase of deployment of AI systems. And we need standards in communication, cybersecurity, which might include as well these deepfakes that we were mentioning. And then it was raised by Robin that we need training and training for law enforcement agencies, policies, judges to be trained on the use of these tools, these AI tools, as evidence in courts, and how to use them appropriately in a trustworthy way. Also, Javier raised this, the importance of standards to take into account SMEs. SMEs are small companies. They are not Googles. They are not Facebooks. They do not have this manpower to provide all this documentation that it's needed for conformity assessment, no? And to be compliant with some regulations. So as a last exercise and to close the panel, from these green sticky notes we have on the screen right now, I would ask you one by one, which would be the most important for you? I mean, the priority for you right now. If you had to put a priority, which one would you focus on? So we can perhaps start by Patrick.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What I want to touch on is a topic that Robin raised earlier, which is about disabled people. And the generalization of that is that all these technologies, any AI algorithm needs to have universality. It needs to work for everyone. And so, how to check that and how to assure that is something that needs to be part of a certification. So I don't know where it fits in here. Bias is a topic.
Giovanni, can we go to the prioritization matrix? I will add there. So yes, I totally agree with you. Indeed, I would have chosen that one as well. So for the main title, we can say standards to take into account discrimination and disabilities. And would you say, yeah, I will do it a bit, it's a bit smaller now. Would you say that it is difficult or that it is easy to implement?
It's definitely difficult to get universal coverage. So in identity proofing, you need, the full citizenry needs to be able to use a system.
So I put it in difficult and important.
I think so.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And for you, Javier, which would be the most important thing to focus on right now?
Bias is important. Maybe this is, yeah, discrimination bias. It's similar, right?
Okay. Thank you very much. And for you, Robin?
I'm going to speak as the lawyer judge here. I think it's easy and important to do training for law enforcement agencies, judges, and to systematize the understanding of what these AI technologies can actually do and what they mean. So it's a training issue.
It's
That's
perfect. And
it costs money, but it's easy to do because you know that it's significant and it's a training program.
exactly. So definitely, if it is easy and important, it's something we can do and we can prioritize. So thank you very much for this feedback. And finally, Rosalia, for you, which would be the most important thing to tackle right now?
Interoperability of the systems to sharing the data and to sharing all the information between law enforcement and not law enforcement agencies organisms. For me, the most important is interoperability to connect, to get the connection, the standardization of course, the standardization of the connection between the different actors at national and European level.
Absolutely. And would you say it is easy?
No, it's so difficult to coordinate and work together, all actors, and at technical level it's so complicated. Yeah.
Double
But it's possible,
complication.
of course, and we are working in it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So thank you very much for this conclusion. I think it's super important for us because we are going to translate all that was said in this workshop to policymakers, of course, and colleagues in the European Commission. And I would like to thank the four of you. It was an excellent and fruitful and richful panel. I learned a lot from all of you. So we can now close this session on AI for law enforcement. I thank all our excellent panelists and all the attendees for your participation. And we will now move to a coffee break until 10:45. And I hope to see you later again in the following sessions and the closest session after the lunch break. So thank you all for attending and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
you
everybody. See you
very
soon.
much. Bye-bye, Isabel.
Thank
you very
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you, and thank you to Patrick for getting up so early or staying up.
Thank you, Patrick. It's true.
No problem at all.
Bye-bye.